And we're going to continue to weave and learn and draw together all of our learnings that we've had over the last 2 days as we continue the conversation with Liz Weaver. Will you please make her welcome?
Thank you. So I'm hoping what should I do here? Just go open. Look at that. Okay, so this is less about talking and more about acting, although there'll be a little bit of talking. You know, so often you come to these two-day workshops and you have lots and lots of ideas, but not really a whole lot of practical tools that you can take away and that you might be able to share with your colleagues, some things that you can do tomorrow. And I know that Danny asked the panel, you know, for their advice about what we should be doing going forward. And so we're really going to use this next hour that we have together, taking you through a couple of really practical tools that you can put into your toolkit, that you can test out with your colleagues back at work or collaborators that you're working with. And hopefully we'll have a little bit of fun as well. Okay, this is all about community change, and that's really the work that we've been going through. So Albert Einstein famously said that we cannot solve our problems with the same thinking that we use to create them. So then it's a really important way of thinking about this work. And so a lot of this work is not only we're working in the area of community change, but it also means that we ourselves have to change, that we have to kind of build some of those skills and competencies in ourselves that really enables us. And we heard yesterday the presentation about the 9 hardwired human instincts, and I thought that that was a really interesting presentation, and I kind of put the mirror up to myself last night and said, how many of those, how often do I jump into kind of judgment before really engaging in those, that reflective practice? So we're going to do some of things like that today. These are the 4 tools we're going to focus on. We really are going to first think about how do we change from always focusing on the agenda to really reflecting on engagement as the focus. And in all our interactions, how can we put engagement first? Engaging with our colleagues, engaging at the meetings that we go to. And so I have a couple of really fun exercises. Well, I think they're fun, you may not. Talk about some of the key elements of collaborative leadership, some of the key capabilities that you have to think about. That part is probably not as fun. And then, you know, we all have those nemesis in our lives, those people that get slightly under your skin. They might be your work colleagues, they might be your family members, they might be people that you encounter in the community, people that, you know, for some reason, you know, just turn you the other way or turn you upside down, and you go away from those meetings with steam coming out of your ears. We're going to figure out how to work with those people. And there's a great exercise called Befriending Your Nemesis that we're going to do, and it's in the package of materials on your seats there. And then finally, really talking about the final exercise is how do we navigate this chaotic stuff that is called community change. So when we put engagement as the focus, it means that we do different things when we hold meetings, right? And so the first thing that we do is we ask people to come and be present at the meeting. How many of you start your meeting saying, you know, okay, so now we're going to go to number 1 on the agenda, I'm going to read the minutes of the last meeting. Most of us do that. At Tamarack, we do things a little bit differently. If we were to start this conference, this would be the question that we would ask you before we engaged in the conference. And the question is, why is it important that I've chosen to come to this conference? There's lots of things that you could be doing in your lives, in your work worlds, but you made a very important choice to come and be with us these last 2 days. And the second question that we're going to ask you to engage in is, what will you do with one thing that you've learned at this conference? So we're going to give you 1 minute to reflect on those 2 questions, and then pair up in groups of 2 and 3, no more than 4, as we learned yesterday, and talk to each other, share with each other. Why is it important that you came to this conference, and what's one thing you're going to do or take away from this conference? So first think, then pair, and then share. When you're ready, just go into conversation. Okay, folks, does anyone want to share the conversation that they had with their colleague? Is anyone brave enough to raise their hand and say why it's important that either they themselves were here or that their colleagues were here? What's your conversation? I'll ask for volunteers, and if I don't get volunteers, I'll get voluntold. So we have a volunteer. So you've got to stand up and use your outdoor voice.
I work in an office by myself. I'm part of a bigger program, but my office is all by myself. So I like to come out and meet other people, but more importantly, get that fresh intake of ideas and thoughts instead of just being in my own little world.
Great.
So it's the sharing part that appeals to me.
Yeah.
I came voluntarily. I didn't come because I had to come as part of the deal. I came voluntarily.
Excellent, excellent. Maybe one more. Okay, so she works in an office by herself, and she doesn't get a lot of kind of interaction. She came voluntarily, but she really wanted to have that cross community input. She wanted to really hear other ideas, and then she's going to take those into her work. Is that a good paraphrasing of what you said? Perfect. Okay. And one more. So we had someone here. Okay, so this person is interested in looking at this as a way of choosing different career pathways down the track. So you can hear, even in those two brief examples, if we started off this meeting about, why is it important that I'm here, we can then, throughout the whole course of the next 2 days, have conversations that actually start to meet the needs of the individuals that have come out, right? And we could have a conversation with you about, here's a career pathway that I'm on, is there an opportunity there? Or here are some new ideas. How could we maybe partner together and get you out of your office even more? So actually creating these small moments, that only took about 5 minutes, but these small moments of interpersonal engagement, these kind of personal connections, and then really, hiving from the audience why it's important that they're here, actually can be transformative, not only for individuals, but it can bond us together as a group. It can really create those connections that we can then build on during the course of the time that we're together. Simple exercise, simple conversations, you're making personal connections. Okay, the next is why do we even collaborate in the first place? And this comes out of some of the work of a guy named David Crislip, and he has a colleague named Kit Larson. And they really say there are, really 5 reasons why we collaborate together. And one is that we have a shared concern. We have a common agenda. We want to see that every child succeeds, right? That is our common purpose. Or we want to connect with one another. We want to learn new skills and activities. We sometimes come together because we want to pool power. Right? There is greater power when we're together as a group. We might come together to build on the diversity of perspectives. We recognize that, we don't hold all the answers and we need to have some of that diversity. Sometimes coming together helps us navigate gridlock that we might have encountered. So I don't know that elected official, but you know that elected official, and coming together helps us meet that elected official. So that's a really critical reason why. And it's also to increase our ability to really handle these complex issues. And all of those reasons are reasons that have brought us together. Crislip and Larson actually talk also about, what are some keys to successful collaboration. And you can see them in the list. They're helpful. And I think, if you're really trying to build your collaborative muscle, you've got to not only know what are the one or two or three reasons why we're coming together, and then what are some keys that will help us navigate that more effectively. We don't have this printed out, but it is a really good tool if you want to. If you're in the space of navigating careers or looking at other options or trying to get you outside of your own headspace, this is some work by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. It's a tool that's available online. It's the Collaborative Leadership Self-Assessment Tool. And there are 6 domains of capacity that they ask you to assess yourself on. And you rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 5, and at the very bottom of each of the lists around trust building, around systems thinking, they actually have you kind of do some reflective practice, which is what do I need to do to build up places where I'm maybe not as strong, where can I build them, what can I do to build those strengths, and then what can I do to really leverage the strengths that I have. And so there's a link to this resource, but it looks at some really core competencies, particularly when we're engaged in collaborative work. And we would say, those of you that are, working in offices, working with partners, or in a family environment, we're continually collaborating. And so how do we build our collaborative strengths? How do we really focus on those things that are, that will help us be more successful? Richard Branson, does anybody know who Richard Branson is? He's an entrepreneur, right? A very successful entrepreneur with lots of brand. Virgin Airlines is one of the Branson brands, Virgin Records. And what was really interesting when I was thinking of collaborative leadership, it doesn't just exist in the social profit sector or the community sector. Really strong and really successful leaders within the business sector also focus on these theories of collaborative leadership and also look to try to attract the very best out of their employees and really look not only on how they envision their work as them being the leader out front, but they also look at their work as at what point do I lead from behind? At what point do I support this work going forward? And so I think it is important to think about, okay, yes, in our sector we do a lot of collaboration, but there's also lots of collaboration across other sectors. There's collaboration within government, there's collaboration within the private sector, and so what are the lessons that we can learn from them? So sometimes looking outside the work that we do actually illustrates for us some other options and some other ways of thinking. And this I think this kind of table, how I came across this table was that Richard Branson tweeted it. And it's his perspective on collaborative leadership. So for those of you not on Twitter, you should get on Twitter. That's all I have to say. So that's kind of collaborative leadership. We're not going to spend a lot of time on it, but it's a critical thing that we have to focus on. And it's one thing that, as leaders within our organizations, as people that are always working in partnership with one another, we've got to build those in our toolkit. So I would suggest download the Robert Wood Johnson Collaborative Leadership Capacity Assessment and spend some time doing that. Now this is the fun part of the session. So, sometimes when we're collaborating together, it's not always the most pleasant road, right? There are people that come to our collaborative tables and we think to ourselves, they're getting under our skins. And so this is an exercise around really figuring out how to work with both our friends, our enemies, and our allies. And the whole intent of this exercise is that the issues in our communities are really too complex, so we really have to figure out what are the strategies to engage all sorts of different people in trying to figure this out. So you all have this tool at your place, or you should have this tool at your place. It's called Befriending Your Nemesis. And so I would draw you to your attention, and I hope you have a pen. Does everybody have a pen? If not, maybe you can borrow a pen from the person sitting next to you if they have an extra one. Go to the back of the worksheet. Okay? And this is a 4-stage process. Think about an individual who is your nemesis, right? Someone might be in your work, someone who might be in your family, someone who might be a collaborator with you. Write down in the first column those attributes that that person has that really irritate you. So it might be that that person never wants to spend any money. They want everything for free. Or that person has to take up all the airspace at the meeting and nobody else can ever talk. So write down, we're giving you space to write down 4 or 5 characteristics about that individual that really get under your skin. Give you a minute to do that. You don't have to write the name of the individual on the page, because you might be sitting beside them. I did this once and I had my nemesis right beside me. That was hard. Okay. The second stage is, what is the opposite to that attribute? So, for example, if the person is overly frugal and they never open up their wallets when you go to dinner, what would be the opposite of that? What's the opposite to that? They're generous. They could be generous, yeah. Okay? So what is the opposite to the attribute that you wrote in the first column? Now, in the third column, how would you reframe that individual's irritating attributes as a positive? So that person is very close to holding their wallets closed. What would be the positive of that? They're probably pretty good with money. They probably are a good saver, right? They've probably, they probably understand how to manage finances. So move into row 3 when you're ready. And then the final column, if you think about that individual in terms of the collaborative work or the teamwork that you're engaged in, how could you use that person's really, what you perceive to be very negative attributes, how could you use it in a way that actually will benefit the collaborative or the work environment or the family environment in which you're existing? So if someone was really tight with money, would you be able to ask them to take on the finances? Would you be able to empower them to think about the budgets of the organization? Would you be able to ask them to review the audit statement and see if there are any flaws in the audit process? What's really interesting about this exercise, if you were really reflective on it, often what most irritates you about your nemesis are flaws that you actually feel in yourself. So if you're really irritated about someone who's very tight with money, maybe you feel sometimes in your heart that you are a spendthrift, right? And that you don't have that skill set. And so it is often nemesis or people that we feel kind of in tension with, they are the shadow of things that we in ourselves feel are a flaw in our own character. So now I'm going to give you about 3 minutes to have a little huddle conversation with the person sitting beside you. What did this raise for you, this little exercise? What ahas came out of it? What questions? What's an aha moment that you had? Okay, quick little 3-minute huddle conversation. Okay, folks, any ahas that anyone would like to share? Any aha moments that might have occurred by going through this quick little exercise. We're all friends. We can share with one another. Who'd like to? Any ahas? No? Yes?
Liz, can I just clarify that first column?
Yeah.
Is almost like us having a connection to that first column?
Yes. There is a, so if you read the front.
I argue with that, but we can't see that.
Sorry?
We can't see that.
You can't see that. Okay. So sometimes when someone's behavior is really irritating to us, there is a reason. There's some kind of reason. And I think yesterday in the session that Andrew did at the end of the day, he talked about the human behaviors, those patterned human behaviors. There's a reason why we react in one way or another, right? And so it might be that that person is just irritating to us, or it might be that there's something about the way that person acts that is a values clash with a value that we hold strongly, right? So, we might hold a value, and this is an irritation to me. My value is that we have to hear all the voices in the room, and if someone takes up all of the airspace, that's a bit of a values clash with my own value around really equity of voice and how do we engage with one another, right? And so that would become a big irritant to me. So it might not be that it's the shadow side, but it might be that there is some kind of a connection that happens that clashes perhaps with one of our values. Does that make sense? Okay. Yes?
How would you work that example that you just articulated? How would you work that through?
Okay, so if the person talks all the time and fills up all the air, right? The opposite of that is that there's opportunities for silence and quiet, right? That's the kind of positive attributes. What I might do is I might say, okay, so that person obviously has something to say. So how do I reframe working with them in a way that gives them some authority so that they can have something to say, but also recognizes that we need the space for others in the room to also say things, right? So that might be how I would work through this from that perspective. Does that make sense? Okay. Oh, the person is sarcastic. Yeah, that's a more challenging one, right? And so you really sometimes have to dig beyond what does that, what is it? Why does that person behave in that way, right? Is there a vulnerability in there that, that is almost like a bit of a protection mechanism? Yeah. That would be I think that would be a bit more difficult, yeah. And what are some other behaviors? So it might not be that you address that one, but by addressing some of the other behaviors that they display, that you might actually navigate your way through that, because it's not just one thing that usually bugs you about a person. Yeah. You might actually ask them, where could they praise things? Right? Are there things that they see that are extremely positive? So to take it away from the kind of, blah, 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 but to say, okay, so what are those things in your life where, that you would say that was really great, right? That had a lot of contributions to it, and to kind of move them into the other realm. Okay? So that's a great little tool. Do it with your family, it'd be kind of interesting. The final thing that we're going to spend some time on, and this is one we use a lot at Tamarack. So we think that lives kind of have, like, the dominant domain is that lives are fairly linear, but in fact, there are two elements to how work happens and how we collaborate and even how change happens. So this comes out of work of the Plexus Institute in Canada and the United States, and this is called the eco-cycle. So in most of our organizations, we go up the performance curve. We start a new idea, and we keep on seeding it and growing it, and then it grows to the point where it matures. And what happens when you get to the point of maturity in organizational life? Things start to shift, right? the number of people that might come out to a program that was really successful begins to drop because things are shifting. So that's the performance curve. When you hit the top of the maturity curve, there's the law of diminishing returns. And then there's this backwards loop that we don't pay very much attention to, which is called the renewal curve. What we've seen in the work of Tamarack and in the work of community change is that we actually start at the bottom of the renewal curve. So any new program, project, our new jobs, if we're going into our new jobs, we actually are in this kind of stage of creative destruction, right, or the stage of renewal. And so you say, okay, I'm going to quit my old job, and then I'm going to think about what else. We had actually a couple of examples here. I'm going to think about what the future might hold for me, right? I'm going to move into ideation. You start at the bottom of the renewal curve, and then you move up into ideation and new ideas. Then you make a choice, and then you start to develop, right? And so you develop a new program, you develop a new collaborative, you develop a new service. You might say, okay, I've thought about all the places I'm going to go on vacation. I'm going to make a choice and go to Hawaii. Right? And so then you start to say, okay, so in Hawaii, where do I want to go in Hawaii? I want to actually maybe go to the beaches, and I might want to go to the lava fields. And so you start to actually develop the plan around your vacation. We do this as a natural course of our lives. Then as you start to develop, you make more and more choices, and you start to go up the maturity curve with that plan. And then you actually go on your vacation, right? And you have a lot of good times and fun. And then a crisis hits. The crisis is the end of the vacation in this example. And then you go back down into creative destruction or renewal. So our lives happen like this. Our organizations happen like this. Our collaboratives happen on this eco-cycle. And mostly it happens in a 3 to 5 year period. So if you think about election cycles, they're 3 to 5 years. If you think about funding cycles in organizations, they might be 1, 2, 3 years, and so you would go around the eco-cycle. If you think about strategic planning in organizations, they kind of have a 3 to 5 year cycle. And even in our lives, we go through that. What's really interesting about this, and you probably can't read it, but you have it as a handout, which is really great for those of you who are like me and need glasses. There are some very visceral reactions that we have in this work, right? So when we're in that kind of creative destruction, there are things that we feel in that area. So let's say we've decided that we're going to leave our job, or something traumatic happens in our family, or we lose a really important colleague at our work, right? We have to go through grief and loss, and there's some shifting that happens in organizations when that happens. And it's similar when we're building collaboratives. What happened, in this creative destruction range to allow a collaborative to happen? We often will see in collective impact work, if there's like a teen youth suicide initiative that's happening, it's probably because a number of teens actually engaged in suicide, right? So that was the crisis that happened that led to something new to develop. I was watching the news this morning before we came, and I heard the statistic that here in Tasmania, 30% of kids don't graduate from high school. That's pretty creative destruction, right? They're making choices there. And so if that is a serious enough issue, what's going to prompt us to bring people together to talk about how we can do things differently? The ideation stage is a really great stage for those of us that like to be in the brainstorming mode, right? It's where you get lots of good ideas, you actually get lots of people together, there's tons of energy around the ideation stage, then we hit the choice stage, we go into development, and then we go up the maturity curve. Now the reality of the eco-cycle is that all of us have a preference, right? So some of us really love ideas, and we're really good at brainstorming lots and lots and lots of good ideas. Some of us really love to develop things and think about, okay, you know, putting together lists and really planning our vacation in a lot of detail. Some of us really like to write terms of reference and that kind of thing, so some of us are really good at that. Some of us are really good as things begin to move up the maturity curve, right? We're really good at documenting results and reporting results. And then some of us are really good at navigating those relationships around creative destruction. So I'm going to have you take out your eco-cycle exercise and go to the bottom of the second page. Okay? Now there's going to be 4 parts to this. So the first part is you as an individual. Of these 4 phases of community change, where do you think you land as an individual? You might be at the beginning of your career, so you're in the idea area, or you might be thinking of a change. You might have just been a new hire, and so you're in that area. You might be actually thinking about retirement, so you might be at the top of the maturity curve, not quite in creative destruction yet, but maybe going that way soon. So put an M on somewhere on the eco cycle for me as an individual. What's my preference of these 4 phases? We're making you have some forced choices here. You know, I once did a workshop, and we were talking about the collaborative change work, and there was an individual who came into this workshop. She was with colleagues, and they were working on literacy, and the first thing that she said when she walked into the room is, "I am 2 weeks away from retirement." Where was she on the eco cycle? She was right at the top of the maturity curve, almost leaving, you know, almost going into crisis. And what that meant for the rest of the group was it actually was quite paralyzing for the rest of the group, because anytime anyone in the group said, "Oh, let's try something new," or "let's move our work in this direction," she would say, "You know, I did that and it didn't work." Right? And so she was a blocker because she was at a place in her career which was not at the place that the rest of the group was. And so she blocked every step of that group moving forward. That was a really hard day to facilitate, right? And you've seen that happen, and I'm sure you've seen that happen in your groups. Okay, so that's me. The second one is, where do you think the organization that you work for, or maybe a place that you volunteer, where do you think that exists on the eco cycle? Is it a big organization with lots of rules and lots of procedures? And so that would probably be a very big, mature organization. Or is it a small, nimble? So put O for organization. Now think about a collaborative that you're part of. It could be Every Child Succeeds. It could be another collaborative planning table that you're sitting at. Where would you put that collaborative? Is it thinking about big ideas? Is it slowly trying to develop itself? Has it done a lot of really good work, but it might be going into renewal soon? Where would you put the collaborative? Put C for collaborative. So now what I want you to do is have a quick little conversation with the folks that are in your kind of immediate vicinity, you know, either in front of you or beside you. What did that raise for you as you started to plot these different elements around the eco cycle? What does it raise for you? One other part of this exercise is that between each of the phases, there is a trap. And so sometimes you're doing your collaborative work or you're doing your work in organizations and you're thinking, why can't we move forward? What's happening here? it's likely that your collaborative work or your organizational work has entered into one of these traps. And the details about the trap are in the handouts, but the trap that exists between creative destruction and the idea phase or the exploration phase is called the chronic disaster trap. And the chronic disaster trap, even though people don't like to be in creative destruction, the chronic disaster trap is characterized with, we can't actually see the future, and anything that we envision we don't think will be successful, right? And who's been at meetings where people said, yeah, that'll never work? That is a symbol, that's symbolic of a chronic disaster trap, that the folks that you have around the table can't envision a different future. And so they want to keep you in creative destruction or keep the work in creative destruction because they don't have enough visionaries or they haven't engaged the visionaries or the idea people around the table to get through that trap. The next trap, as you go from exploration into development, that trap is either called the scarcity trap or the poverty trap. And this is, again, a really interesting trap. You've done lots of exploration, got lots of really good ideas. You feel like there's energy and momentum, but none of the ideas are compelling enough to really have the group pull the trigger on any of the ideas. Or there might be too many ideas, right? And so, oh my goodness, we have too many ideas. There's an example of a collective impact initiative in Edmonton, Ontario, or Edmonton, Alberta. It's a poverty initiative. They have 72 priorities. They did not get through the scarcity trap very well. They did not make any choices. They just said, okay, in order to appease the people in our community, we're going to take 72 priorities and we're going to try our best to move them all forward. Another part of the scarcity trap is that, and Nigel talked about this a lot in his presentation, is that you wait for the perfect plan, right? I lived in the scarcity trap in Hamilton for 18 months. 18 months we lived in the scarcity trap, and it was because we would go to our two organizations, our two conveners were the City and the Community Foundation, both organizations that were way at the top of the maturity curve, and we were coming with a plan that was very developmental. We don't know what we're going to do. We kind of have this good enough plan. Do you feel like we can go forward with it? And they would say, no, we need all the I's dotted and all the T's crossed. In fact, they made us do an exercise where they asked us to do a logic model for dealing with poverty in Hamilton. 72 pages later, we still didn't have our logic model completed, right? Because it was too complex. And so they kept us in that trap, waiting for the perfect plan. The way we negotiated our way out of that trap was we said, okay, we're not going to have the perfect plan. Let's reframe the language and call these starting point strategies, right? We're going to start with these strategies. And then they felt like, okay, we're okay with that. We can live with that. It's not the perfect plan, but we're going to start somewhere, right? And they also had some pressure from the external. So the scarcity trap is a real trap. If you're feeling like you're not getting momentum, you're likely in the scarcity trap. The trap from development into moving up the maturity curve, that trap is called the parasitic trap. And this is, again, another really interesting trap. And some of you may have felt this trap and not really known it, right? So the parasitic trap is that one thing is a parasite on the other. So it might be that the table wants to move forward really quickly, but the organization that's hosting the table feels like it can't move forward as quickly as the table wants it to move forward. Or it might be the other way. The organization or the funder says, you guys got to get a move on, and the table hasn't fully discussed, what does that mean and what are the implications of that for the table. Again, when we're doing living wage work, in Hamilton, we actually ended up in the parasitic trap because we wanted to step out on living wage. The table wanted to step out on living wage, but not all the people around the table and the organizations around the table were paying living wage. And so there was a bit of a values clash there, and so we ended up in the parasitic trap. And then finally, when you get to the top of the maturity curve, and you're starting to kind of go a little bit around the bend, you actually end up in the rigidity trap. And a good characteristic of the rigidity trap is, okay, we know that we started off with 20 people in our program, and now there are 2 people that are attending, but gosh darn it, if we just advertise a little bit more, if we just, hold it in another place in the community, we are going to get people to come out to our program. So we're rigid. We just keep trying to plan the work and work the plan, and we're not actually looking at what is happening, right? That this program actually maybe isn't even relevant to the participants that it was relevant to in the first place. And so that's the rigidity trap. And sometimes we fail because we hold ourselves in that rigidity trap for too long. We don't allow ourselves to move forward. And so, I'm going to give you about 2 minutes to have a quick conversation. Think about, where you've plotted things, and think particularly about the collaborative work that you're engaged in. What trap is it facing? And what might you do to help that collaborative work move through that trap? So 2 minutes to really brainstorm together. What's the trap that collaborative work is facing, and how do you navigate your way through it? Okay, we probably could have a very long conversation about the traps. This can be a really helpful tool if you're stuck, to have your group plot out where it is, to see what trap is coming in front of you, and to help you have really good conversations about navigating the traps. The reason why I have you plot yourself on the eco-cycle is that in a collaborative, we have all sorts of people with all sorts of skills. And so when we're in the idea phase, let's bring in those folks. When we're in the development phase, let's bring in those folks. When we're at maturity, let's bring in those folks and those competencies. And when we need to navigate through renewal or creative destruction, let's figure out who has those skills. This is a really fun tool. I'd encourage you to play around with it. Think about it, in your collaborative context. Think about it in your organizational context. Sometimes, we have a really mature organization and a really entrepreneurial person coming into that mature organization, and early on they go, whoa, this is not the organization for me, and so this is what you are able to see with the eco-cycle. I know I only have 1 more minute left. I look upon these tools as things that can be reflective, right? Things that we can do, easy things that are accessible, where we can reflect on, what does this mean for me as a leader? So I'm going to ask one of you, and Danny, do we have a microphone somewhere? Oh, I have one up here. Can we go to the audience? Is someone in the audience willing to read this poem? Oh, we've got someone with their hand out. This is my final thoughts to you as we close this session.
In an age of speed, I began to think nothing could be more invigorating than going slow. In an age of distraction, nothing could feel more luxurious than paying attention. In an age of constant movement, nothing is more urgent than sitting still.